Okay, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday. I'm quite a bit late for my stream. If I'm going to stick to this 11 a.m. Riga time, 1 p.m. right now, Monday, January 27th. Today, I just want to take a quick look at some maps, actually, and put in perspective how behind the global south, as it's now called, actually is. But also a little bit of commentary, of course, on the war in Ukraine from Russia and perhaps the war in Taiwan that could happen. Shouldn't have said it like that, but possible invasion of Taiwan by China, according to Ryan Macbeth. Spring or fall, perhaps 2027, 2028. So already with those words, I'm pretty sure this video is not going to get viewed or maybe demonetized. I don't really know. But because using the word Taiwan is probably not so good in videos if you're trying to cater to the Chinese audience. So here we go. Just going to try to do this relatively swiftly. I'm going to put on a couple maps of the world here, okay? So this is population, and these little bubbles are, of course, the size relative to everybody else, okay? If you're at a bubble about this size, you see under my title, that's 50 million people, okay? 25 million is this size. U.S. here, over 300 million. These are IMF estimates. And we have China, of course, 1.4 billion, India, 1.4 billion. Big margin of error, I should say there. Could be like a couple 100 million, as far as I know. But nonetheless, that's what the count is. Pakistan here, another big one, 230 million. Now just look at these bubbles here down below. We got Nigeria, big nation. Indonesia, big nation, almost 300 million. Brazil, big nation, 200 million. We got South Africa, 62 million. Argentina, 47. Australia, big continent, not quite a huge nation, population-wise. But just three charts here for the video. I want to, or three maps, want to compare these population sizes with just some other basic economic indicators, okay? And those three are going to be GDP, the global monetary base, which I calculate, and military spend. So in every of the three maps that I'm going to show you, just pay attention to this global south. All the bubbles are going to shrink. Pretty big, in fact. We got the Philippines here, pretty big nation, 114 million. Vietnam, 100 million. Thailand, 70 million. All right. Southeast Asia here, pretty big countries. And even in the Middle East, right? We got Turkey, 87 million. Iran, 87 million. Iraq, 44 million. Egypt, 107 million. So these bubbles are fairly big. But as you would expect, when I'm going to put GDP on, monetary base, military spend, they're going to shrink down. Also notice that we have big gaps. I'm not even drawing just for effect. I'm not coloring in the nations where there is no data, or I haven't added data for the monetary base, okay? I have the 50 largest currencies in the world that you're going to see, and I have kept that consistent across the map. So what you see here is there's only 5 currencies in South America that make the cut, okay? Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, okay? All the other ones, Ecuador is dollarized, Uruguay, Paraguay, other South and Central American nations don't make the cut, so they're not colored in. Then, of course, a lot of Central and Sub-Saharan Africa is not on here, and some Central Asian nations. Mongolia is not on here. It doesn't make the cut of the top 50 currencies, okay? So that's why I'm not putting every country here. And a lot of Northern African countries as well. Morocco, Kenya doesn't make the cut in top 50. And the reason these Central and Western African nations make the cut is together as a block. They're big enough. So we have the Western African Currency Union and the Central African Currency Union. These are these bubbles here. All right. So with that in mind, let's just look at how these larger bubbles in the global south, as it's called, shrink down. Here's GDP. Okay. Back to population, GDP. Population, GDP. See, India shrunk down. Even China shrunk down, relative, right, to its share in population. Everything shrunk down. United States grows. All right, but all bubbles basically shrink except for the United States and Europe. Okay? Population, GDP. Brazil kind of keeps it, but look at how much smaller these Central and Western African nations are. Australia and New Zealand grow just a little bit. I know I'm right on the edge of the map there, but hopefully you can see those bubbles. Just wanted to maximize screen space here for you. But again, going back, global south, like Colombia, Peru, Argentina, like relatively those bubbles shrink down for GDP. All right. Russia, relatively the same. We got a $2 trillion economy here with Russia. All right, but that is very volatile, and we have its refining and production facilities attacked every night now by Ukraine, which is kind of interesting. They've been mercilessly attacking Ukraine here, which is GDP-wise, 10 times smaller than Russia at 188 billion estimated 24. Still amazing in 2024 that they are delivering food to the rest of the world, but 10 times smaller in economy. In population, not as small here. They're showing 33 million. It's probably less than that in Ukraine right now. If you take all of the refugees into account, pre-war it was over 40 million. Okay, full-scale invasion. Russia 142 million. Nonetheless, look, Europe, obviously, bubbles get bigger. When you look at economic numbers, United States bubbles get bigger when you look at economic factors here. India smaller, China even a little bit smaller, even though we know China is the second biggest economy in the world. All right, so that's world GDP. Now let's take a look at world monetary base, and they get even more extreme, okay, as you might expect. So now focusing on currency dominance and looking at the dollar value of that, look at here how, again, the global south bubbles get even smaller. Okay. Brazil in particular, look how it's smaller. All right. So it's relative to everybody else, relative to, their size in the data set. Nigeria now just 16 billion. It's the largest African country. I think it's even larger. Oh, no, South Africa is larger, 26 billion monetary base. Nigeria, $16.5 billion. That is using a black market rate, by the way, for Nigeria. Brazil, 200 billion, by far the biggest in the global south, probably developing, right? We can call Australia developed, about 200 billion, same as well. But Indonesia, smaller, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, all much, much smaller in size compared to, I'm going back to population figures. All right. So we go back to the monetary base. Here again, look how Russia, about 300 billion. And remember, Russia has about 200 billion in gold, 300 billion in foreign currency reserves. So theoretically, that monetary base is a sound value. But remember, 300 billion is locked up in Europe and the United States, which is a good thing for them to stop attacking Ukraine. But they're going to keep going. They're going to keep going, as we know, until Putin is exhausted monetarily, all right, economically, bankrupt. That's the only way that Russia will stop. Putin, I should say, was groveling over the last week to Trump to try to get a meeting to make something happen where he can save some face for his disastrous war of 3 years in Ukraine. We'll see how that goes with Trump. But nonetheless, again, look at how these figures now are much bigger. The bubbles are even more extreme than GDP. Okay, see, look, this is GDP, monetary base. GDP, monetary base. GDP, monetary base. See, the euro, and I'm just coloring all of Europe the same color. I'm not delineating, right? This is broken down by euro monetary base in each country. Definitely countries, like Latvia, my home country, 9.7 billion. All right, quite a bit smaller than Germany's $1.4 trillion monetary base. Okay, the UK trillion. All right, if you add all that up, the euro itself gets about the size of this bubble. I was thinking about doing it for a block here, but I just figured divide it down by nations. But if you put the euro in dollar terms together, it would be something like this bubble, the actual euro currency. All right. But the point is, again, Global South really is far behind. All these other countries aren't even big enough to be on the map, right? I'm not even painting them in. Okay. A couple North African countries, Algeria and Egypt. Got the Middle East, and China is actually relatively bigger if you look at their monetary base, and Japan gets even bigger, which is interesting, right? The yen, the core of the Japanese economy still relatively holds its value, and the Japanese Bank of Japan is raising interest rates at the moment, so they're going to pay more in interest, which will bring home more of their Japanese offshore capital. Japan is still a rich country, not just in GDP terms, but the money that the central bank has printed has still, relatively held its value versus the dollar, versus the Chinese yuan, versus the euro. So again, you can see that if GDP, Japan's even smaller. This is GDP. All right, the bubble for Japan is smaller, and China. But when it comes to money, it's bigger. But look at Russia. Russia, again, a little bit bigger, $2 trillion economy, which that's going to be lower, I think. Actually, this estimate actually was from earlier, 2024. So I think when all said and done, it should be smaller. I think monetary base makes that circle even smaller. Kazakhstan, even smaller. It's a little bit bigger, $300 billion economy in GDP. Now we look at monetary base, $25 billion for the Kazakh tenge, I believe it is. Nonetheless, again, Global South is very weak here. And, oh, sorry. I'm just hearing that my mic is always low on the live videos. Try to keep it. I mean, I'm redlining here, guys. So tell me if it's still bad. But I got it boosted. Anyway, let me know. And yeah, when we do post the other videos, my sound guy helps me out and cleans it up, makes it a little bit more, boosts it. So regarding a couple questions here now. Again, so Russia looks bigger population-wise, kind of like Global South. But when you look at economy, you look at base money, it gets smaller. Okay. Now the interesting thing, we're going to look at military spend. Okay. So here comes military spend. This is a 1-year military spend, just like GDP is a 1-year number. Okay, this is just total value of all goods and services sold. As we know, United States is probably unfairly or too much a service-based economy. All right, that's got to change. Got to bring back more manufacturing for the United States because so much of it has been offshore to China. China is mostly a manufacturing-based economy. So just some interesting little differences there. But let's go now to military spend, a 1-year figure. Okay, so American 1-year GDP, close to 30 trillion, $28 trillion. Let's go to military spend. All right. GDP, military spend. Similar to monetary base, it's smaller. All right, smaller. China and Japan is actually quite a bit smaller. Russia's bigger, though. Russia's bigger. And a couple more things to say here, right? So Russia, we're looking at 109 billion. The United States, nearly $1 trillion. All right, in a 1 year military spend. Russia's probably gonna. This is a 2023 number. For 2024, this could be double. Also, they hide it in other agencies, so this could be double. This could easily be 200 billion that they're spending on the military. China as well is hid. Some people have said this could be double as well. Call it 500 billion. So they're catching up. To Europe and North America. But again, Global South is just completely nowhere to be found here. You know, the Wagner Group still operates in Africa, although they're losing their linchpin of a base, both for the naval and the air base in Syria at the moment. Africa's a quagmire for everybody. It's just so much smaller. Again, South America, you got the same 5 countries that are big enough for their currency to show up on my monetary base. Exhibits. Let's go back to GDP. GDP, monetary base, military spend. Okay. So still way behind compared to population. All right, it's much more balanced, as you can see, much more balanced, much more representation here in the Global South in population than any of the other 3. And yeah, I think this is the tragedy. This is something that we still haven't figured out. You know, if you think about what the U.S. did in the last 20 years, all right, spending similar amounts. Okay, it wasn't this high. This is the latest current number, nearly $1 trillion. It was building up to this over the last 20 years. But let's just assume the proportions were the same. China's probably grown more in the last 20 years. But the U.S. being just the major hegemon in the world still could not handle, Afghanistan, which isn't on the map here. Up here. And with Iraq, it also doesn't look great. What they've been doing. This is going to be the coalition and Iraq forces here at $5 billion. But for everything that the U.S. did in the last 20 years, didn't look great. All right, it's a lot of time, effort, blood, and treasure for having that disastrous withdrawal in 2021, followed up by the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And, it just shows that, firstly, the dollar amounts, yes, they hide some difficulties, right? I mean, when your goal is not clear, when you're fighting insurgencies, when perhaps you're not going to war under the right pretext or the right, reasons, it can be quite difficult. It was difficult for the Soviet Union to go into Afghanistan. It was difficult for the United States to go into Afghanistan. But with Ukraine, now look at Ukraine now. This is a 2023 number. They were well smaller. This bubble is huge compared to, look at the monetary base. This is Ukraine. Well smaller here at 25 billion, 10 times smaller than the Russian monetary base. But the spend now, again, Russia is probably high, is definitely higher. It could be double this year in 2024. But Ukraine's probably going to be double as well. Maybe not double, but definitely up there. And you look at what the coalition, NATO, United States, free Western forces could have done in this situation, in my opinion. If you just look at these bubbles, you look at the monetary values. When there's a clear goal, I think pushing Russia out of Ukraine would have been achievable in 2 or 3 weeks. I've been saying that for a long time. Still my opinion. Something very different than going in and trying to run in counterinsurgencies, not a defined goal, managing issues in the Middle East, as opposed to just helping friends out. And I remind everybody there's nothing more American, for my American friends, there's nothing more American than getting help from France in your revolution of independence, because the French were instrumental in pushing out the British at Yorktown and other major battles and things as far as embargoes, imports, ships, soldiers, guns. France was instrumental. And Yorktown, they actually had more of those things. More soldiers, more ships, more artillery, more deaths, more casualties. There's nothing more American than helping your friends. So that's not a popular view in this sort of revanchist, hard right American world that we live in at the moment. But, everybody's allies here in Europe. No one in Europe wants to, they know that war is damaging, detrimental to the economy. No one wants to pull economies down, invade other countries here in Europe. All right. We got, of course, Donald Trump talking about invading other places as an opening gambit of difficult, putting on a difficult face for potential counterparts. Something I don't necessarily agree with. But as far as spending on your own defense, yeah, Europe still has done a lot, still could do more for Ukraine. And Russia's going to continue to do more. They're only going to stop when they're completely exhausted, monetarily, bankrupt wise. And everybody's got to know that. It's you can read the tea leaves. Putin wants to talk to Trump alone. He will in the coming weeks, it seems. But he's not been happy with the prior conversations before Trump came in president. They showed the pictures of Melania naked on his victory. That was a clear signal and symbol to Trump that they were going to continue to play hardball. So, the only real recent war, I guess, Balkans is more complicated, but certainly with what happened with Kuwait, where Saddam invaded in 91, same time the Soviet Union was breaking down. Saddam invaded Kuwait. There was a swift response from NATO and, upheld that world order. But it's very different right now. It's very different. Firstly, we got rising interest rates now. We had falling interest rates then. So rising interest rates are much more difficult thing to deal with than falling interest rates. And also China and Iran and Russia and North Korea, which isn't even on the map, but not sure about their military spend. It's probably not as much as 47 billion here. It's certainly not. The economy is like 1/10. All right, let's go back to the economy. Not even 1/10, probably. Their economy is not even 170 billion. It's probably 50 billion. North Korea's. South Korea's 1.7 trillion. North Korea's, 20 times smaller. But even with this, these pretty big military spends from Korea and Japan, you got China, you got Iran, you got Turkey, which is oddly in NATO, but everybody knows that they have different intentions, and they're going to have different intentions in Syria. They want to make Syria, according to their sphere of influence. Okay, but we have Iran, China. India is not really going to play ball. They're going to keep going with the cheap oil. So it is multipolar from that side. But one of the things that I really like, and this is kind of just how I wanted to bring up the topics here, is, Anne Applebaum wrote a great book recently, Autocracy, Inc. I recommend it, Autocracy, Inc. And the other definition of multipolar that she uses there is not just what China and Iran and Russia say. It's not just that we don't want to follow the United States' rules. They want to remake the rules. Okay, so they want to remove all of the generally accepted, even going back to the Helsinki Accords, which the Soviet Union signed in the 1970s. The Helsinki Accords, which moved into further UN documents and agreements, they were all based in human rights for everyone. Human rights for everyone. And they want to remove those. All right. So whether it's the Uyghurs in China being susceptible to whatever they want to do, or whether it's what happens to the Taiwanese, whether it's what happens to the Ukrainians in the sphere of influence of the Russians, who knows how Turkey's going to, Turkey, I think it was Jake Bro said Erdogan's like Littlefinger. It's probably right. You never really know where they're going to go there. And even though they're in NATO, even though they're on the Mediterranean sort of alliance, they're going to go their own way. So it's not just about multipolarity. We don't want to follow the United States' rules. It's we want to make our own rules. We want to subjugate any people, and this is going to include a lot of different things. I mean, Russia acts like they're this sort of bastion of family values. Everybody who follows more than a slight veneer knows that's not even close at all. But they're going to still push that, right? I mean, it's over 10 years ago now that Pussy Riot was fighting their weaponization of the Orthodox Church in Russia. Okay. So, minority rights, gay rights, LGBTQ. I mean, even, this is like old Nazi stuff, like handicapped people, they're not going to be looked well upon in Russian Federation. Like, it's just, there's a whole different view here that China, Russia, and Iran, for sure, they all have different views. It's not like they're all national socialist or they're all communist. Russia's this sort of nationalist mafia state. China's communist. Iran is this theocracy. They all have sort of different agendas, but the one thing that they share is they do not want to go on the human rights path that was laid down over the last 30 years. So it's scary, I think. This is just what I wanted to show. We see that there's really nobody to help us push this agenda. When you look at the UN, I'm thinking of, some great speeches that the Kenyans made when Ukraine was invaded 3 years ago. Even with a lot of this support, and there's been this peace summit last year that the Ukrainians did in Switzerland, you get a lot of global support, but the economic power, the military power is just not there. That's what's difficult. It is still coming back to, the great northern powers, that are setting the agenda here. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong for the world. I'm just saying when you look at specifically what Russia is doing in Ukraine, they have fully teamed up now with China and Iran. And we can say to some extent Turkey and India to shape their views of where they want human rights to go. Got a couple questions here. Is Bitcoin bigger than the Russian economy? It is about the same size. Okay, but these are also, keep in mind, GDP is a flow. So a BTC market cap would be a stock. These are flows. So these are going to happen every year. And this is another interesting thing too, right? It's not like we go back to Mesopotamia. Even with war and chaos and madness, like Ukraine still can run a $200 billion economy, even with a huge percentage of that goes to the military. These things continue on year after year. I mean, people got to eat, people got to work. So these numbers, they're still way smaller, all right, than the population bubbles. Okay. And I'm reminded by the percentages I have for the monetary base breakdown, right? So these are all monetary based countries. Every country that you see here is a top 50 currency in the world. There are some blocks, Central African, Western African nations, the Euro, 3 currency blocks. But these are the top 50 currencies in the world, right? And if you look at GDP, 96% of global GDP would be inside the 50 currencies. But if you look at population, you can see that it's even more skewed, but also there are bigger populations outside of these bubbles even. So the top 50 currencies only make up about 84%, 85% of global population, meaning these white spots in Africa, South America are much bigger relative to the rest. Okay, so that's another interesting thing. So yeah. This is what I just wanted to show today. We can come back to this if you guys have any other ways to break this map down or things you want to think about. We can look at global budgets as well for governments. All right, they generally come to these same things, but for sure you can see that population, China, India dominate. Global South is big players. Indonesia, big player. Philippines, Brazil. But then once you break it down to GDP, money's even more extreme. And military spend is probably can say also more extreme. Not as Europe doesn't look as strong as it does with the euro. That's kind of interesting, right? Remember, these bubbles aren't relative to each other, but they are relative to each other in the group. So it does make sense still to say that the fact that these red bubbles of Europe are smaller compared to if you were looking at euro values of the total Europe, the monetary value of the Europe worldwide. Europe does not keep up with the spending that Russia is doing, or Saudi Arabia. Remember, Saudi Arabia was a big one. If you look at this as percentage, probably should do another just percentage of GDP bubbles to show you. But the military spend is huge here in Saudi Arabia. That's a gigantic figure. It's like over 10%, or like maybe 8% of their GDP. Turkey's big. Iran's kind of big. Israel's huge. It's $27 billion in 2023 is huge. Egypt is not big. All right, look at Egypt, just 4 billion, 3 billion. So the only way that Putin is going to stop and save face is if he goes bankrupt. That's what the understanding seems to be. I don't think he will stop with just Trump saying, let's have a ceasefire. I could be wrong about that, but he wants to keep his imperial ambitions going, which is just bizarre. Everybody in Europe knows peace is better, free trade is better. We tried that for 30 years, and Russia still acts like, with all this territory, somehow they're at risk. Someone wants to invade them. It's very sad. And then everybody knows with what, as Ryan Macbeth says, 2027, 2028, it's a thing to watch out here. Taiwan is very much smaller. This is actually relatively decent size. Monetary base, actually relatively decent size, 200 billion. But population, 23 million against 1.4 billion. GDP, okay, 800 billion against 18 trillion. This is a tough one as well, coming down the pike. But rising interest rates, lower, let's say, I think it's a higher actually Gini coefficient. It means it's worse, I believe. So, we're just more skewed here with GDP, with military spend in the global south. So, Trump asked for China to come help at the table with Russia. We'll see how that goes. Very different world than it was even 10 years ago. We got big power politics, big imperial games. And I really do agree with what Ann Applebaum said, that it's not anymore about just countries want to do whatever they want. It's not just that multipolarity in the sense of we don't want to follow the United States. That's not it. It's also that we don't want to follow things like basic human rights. That is for sure. Russia would happily expunge anything about Ukrainians if they could tomorrow. That's why Ukraine has a huge military budget here, and why I think they should be supported to the max. So thank you, Pan B, for being here. And send me some more links, by the way, Pan B, on what I can do for you guys. I need to get them up on my website. Not nearly as big as the guys like Jake Bro and people that have been doing Ukraine, hardcore every day, but I'll try to improve it. So unless you guys got any other questions, this is mostly what I wanted to show. Europe's got to get their act together. Trump will actually help that. He is right on making sure they need to spend more. But we still have to have freedom winning here and not going to these, just Orwellian, no human rights type of a situation, which is clearly what Russia, Iran, and China want to do. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Talk to you tomorrow.